I want to tell you something I've never said out loud. Not to a friend. Not to a therapist. Not even to myself, not really, not in words that sat still long enough to mean something. It lived inside me the way most true things do. Quietly, in the hours between midnight and sleep, when the house was dark and the day had finally stopped asking things of me. I was 26 when it started. Or maybe it started long before that, and 26 was just the year I stopped pretending it hadn't. I was working a job that paid enough to keep me tired. The kind of tired that isn't physical, the kind that settles behind your eyes and follows you into weekends. I was the oldest kid in a family where being oldest meant something. It meant you didn't complain. It meant you had answers. It meant you got up in the morning and performed competence so convincingly that everyone around you believed it, and eventually you started believing it too, until one evening you're standing in your bathroom at 11 o'clock at night, and you realize your hands are shaking and you don't actually know why. I didn't know why. That's the honest part. I'm not going to dress this up, no pun intended, into some clean origin story where I can point to the exact moment and say, that's where it began. Life doesn't give you those. Life gives you accumulations. Mine was the accumulation of years spent being whatever the room needed. At work, I was reliable, steady, the one who stayed late, the one who nodded when the manager made a bad call because the alternative was conflict, and conflict required an energy I was already spending elsewhere. At home, at my mother's house, because yes, I had moved back in at 24 after a breakup that I won't detail here except to say it taught me something I wasn't ready to learn. At home, I was dutiful. Present. I cooked on Sundays. I fixed the kitchen faucet. I drove my younger brother to his appointments and didn't mention that I'd rearranged my own afternoon to do it. I was useful. I was stable. I was exhausted in a way I had no language for. And then one night, a Tuesday, I remember, because Tuesday is a nothing day, a day without even the ceremony of a Monday's dread or a Friday's relief. I was in my bedroom, and I opened the closet to put away some folded laundry, and my hand touched the edge of something soft. It was a blouse. My mother's. She'd asked me to hang up a few things she'd left in the dryer, and I'd brought them up without thinking, and now I was holding this soft, pale green blouse with tiny buttons down the front, and something in me went very, very quiet. Not excited. Not ashamed. Quiet. The way you go quiet when something true is standing in front of you, and you're not sure you're ready to look at it directly. I put the blouse on the hanger. I hung it in the closet. I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the floor for a long time. That was all. But I thought about it for 3 days. On the 4th day, I went to the thrift store 2 towns over. Not the one near us. Not the one where I might run into someone. The one with the hand-painted sign and the parking lot that was always half empty on weekday afternoons. I told myself I was just looking. I looked for 40 minutes. I walked every aisle with the careful, unhurried movement of someone who knows exactly what they're doing but has not yet admitted it to themselves. I touched fabrics. I read tags. I put things back. I picked them up again. I bought a simple wrap skirt in dark navy and a blouse in cream with a modest collar and 3/4 sleeves. I paid cash. I drove home with the bag on the passenger seat, covered with my jacket because the bag itself felt like evidence of something I hadn't named yet. I didn't tell anyone. I went to my room. I locked the door, something I rarely did because locks in our house always prompted questions, and questions required energy. I sat with the bag for a long time before I opened it. When I put those clothes on, I didn't feel transformed. I didn't feel electric or euphoric or freed. Those are the stories people tell because they make for better reading. What I felt was something smaller and more important than that. I felt like I could breathe. Just that. Just breath. Like something that had been pulled tight across my chest had loosened by 1 degree, and that 1 degree was everything. I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I looked at myself the way you look at someone you're meeting for the first time and trying to figure out if they're going to be important to you. I thought, hello. And then I heard my mother's footsteps on the stairs. I want to be clear about something before I continue. My mother is not a dramatic woman. She does not shout. She does not make speeches. She processes things slowly and privately, and then, when she has finished processing, she speaks in complete sentences without raising her voice. This is both her greatest quality and, in certain moments, the most unnerving thing about her. I heard her footsteps. I had maybe 4 seconds. The lock. I had locked the door. I was sure I had locked the door, but the lock on my bedroom door had been slightly broken since I was 17, and you had to turn it a full rotation and then press it inward to get it to catch properly, and in the moment when I'd locked it that evening, I had apparently done only half of that. She knocked once, which was her custom, and then she opened the door. I was standing in the middle of my room in a navy wrap skirt and a cream blouse, facing the mirror, and I watched in the reflection as her face moved through 3 expressions in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, then a kind of rapid, internal recalibration, and then something that settled into stillness. She looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us said anything. I wanted to disappear. I want to be honest about that. I wanted to dissolve directly into the floorboards and never be spoken of again. Every muscle in my body had gone rigid with the specific shame of being seen in the middle of something you haven't yet decided how to explain. She came into the room. She closed the door behind her, gently, quietly, and she walked to the bed and sat down on the edge of it, the way she used to sit when she came to check on me as a child after a hard day at school. She said, "Come sit with me." I didn't move for a moment. Then I sat in the desk chair across from her, because I couldn't make myself sit beside her. Not yet. She looked at me for a long time. Not with pity. Not with horror. She looked at me the way she looked at things she was trying to understand. She said, "How long?" I said, "Tonight is the first time." She nodded slowly. Then she said, "That's not what I'm asking." I understood what she meant. She meant how long had I been carrying this. She meant the years before the blouse in the closet, before the thrift store bag on the passenger seat, before tonight. I thought about lying. The habit of it was so automatic. Instead I said, "A long time. I don't know exactly." She nodded again. Then she was quiet for what felt like several minutes, and I sat in the desk chair and felt the strange double experience of wanting her to say something and being terrified of whatever it would be. When she finally spoke, she didn't say what I was braced for. She didn't say what I had spent years imagining she might say in a moment like this, the words that lived in the dark part of my mind as a warning, a reason to keep the door locked, to keep everything locked. She said, "The blouse I left in the dryer last week, the green one, did you want to keep that?" I stared at her. She said, "It might not be your size, but it's a nice blouse." I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. I didn't cry. I'm not a crier, generally. But something happened in my chest that was very close to the feeling just before crying, that pressure and release, and I had to look at the floor for a moment before I could look at her again. I said, "Mom, what does that mean?" She said, "It means you're my child, and you're clearly not sleeping, and you've lost weight since spring, and whatever is happening with you matters to me. And if some of it is this," she gestured gently, not unkindly, at the skirt, at the blouse, "then we're going to figure it out together." She paused. She said, "And we're going to start by figuring out what actually fits you." She said it simply, plainly, in the tone she used when she was talking about practical matters. And somehow the practicality of it, the refusal to make it into a crisis, cracked something open in me that years of silence had sealed shut. I said, "I don't know what I'm doing." She said, "Nobody does at first." She stood up, smoothed her trousers, and walked to the door. Before she opened it, she turned back and said, "Dinner in 20 minutes. Come down when you're ready. Dressed however you want." She left. She went downstairs. I heard the sound of pots, the quiet normalcy of her making tea. I sat in the desk chair for a long time. Then I got up, went to the mirror, and looked at myself again. I still didn't know what I was looking at exactly, but I was starting to think it might be worth finding out. The days after that conversation had a particular texture. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just textured in the way that days are when something important has shifted and you're still learning how to move differently inside the new shape of things. My mother did not bring it up at breakfast. She did not give me books or articles or advice I hadn't asked for. She did not tell anyone. She made tea in the morning and asked if I wanted eggs and talked about whether the neighbor's tree was going to cause problems with the gutters again. She was, in other words, herself. which gave me permission to take my time. I wore the skirt and blouse in my room in the evenings after work. Not every night. Some nights I was too tired for anything that required thought, and those nights I ate leftover rice standing over the sink and went to bed at 9 and stared at the ceiling until my body remembered how to stop. But the nights I did put them on, I found that I was doing something I hadn't done in a very long time. I was paying attention to myself. Not in the anxious, self-critical way. I paid attention when I was going over a mistake at work or when I caught my reflection and immediately cataloged what was wrong with it. This was different. This was the kind of attention you give something you're curious about rather than disappointed in. I noticed that I stood differently when I was wearing something that felt chosen. That sounds small. It is not small. I had spent years shrinking slightly. Not dramatically, not in a way that anyone would have called me out on, but in the small physical ways that people shrink when they are perpetually trying to take up a little less space. Shoulders rounded forward by degrees. Chin slightly down. The posture of someone who is always slightly braced. When I stood in the mirror in the evenings, I caught myself straightening. Not performing straightness. Not that rigid, uncomfortable military posture of someone trying to look confident, but genuinely settling into my spine. Like the bones remembered something the rest of me had forgotten. I started paying attention to that feeling during the day. At work, in meetings, I would notice when I had rounded inward, and I would gently, without making it a big thing, come back. Back to my full height. Back to my shoulders. Back to a version of myself that was not perpetually apologizing for existing. It is strange to say that wearing a skirt at home in the evenings changed how I sat in Monday morning meetings. But it did. Not because of any magic. Because paying attention to yourself in one area teaches you how to pay attention in others. I started sleeping better. Only slightly at first. 20 minutes more. Then 30. Then whole nights of the dense, dark sleep I hadn't had since I was a student, when exhaustion was clean and physical and you lay down and disappeared until morning. I started eating meals instead of consuming food as an afterthought. I made actual dinners sometimes. I sat at the table. I used a good plate, not a paper one. These are not revelations. I know that. There is nothing profound about eating off a real plate. But when you have been running on fumes and performance for a long time, these small acts of taking yourself seriously accumulate into something. My mother noticed. She didn't say much. She was not a woman who narrated other people's progress back to them, but one evening she said, quietly, that I seemed a bit more like myself lately. I asked her what she meant. She thought about it and then she said, "You're not moving like you're apologizing for something." I thought about that for a long time after. I had never noticed that I moved that way. But she was right. I had been moving through my own life like a footnote, present but parenthetical, existing but not quite claiming the space. The evenings in my room were teaching me how to take up space again. Carefully. Without announcement. Just a little more each time. I want to be clear that nothing was resolved. I had not figured out who I was or what any of this meant for my future or how to explain it to anyone beyond my mother. Those questions lived in me the same way the earlier ones had, quietly, at the edges, not gone but not demanding immediate answers. I let them be there. I did not pick at them the way I might once have, trying to force clarity before clarity was ready. Instead, I focused on the simple discipline of taking care of myself. I established a routine. I know that sounds administrative, but routine is a kind of mercy when your mind is disorganized. I had certain things I did in a certain order in the evenings, and those things created a container. Inside the container, I could rest. I washed my face properly. I moisturized, which I had not done in years, because it felt like a luxury I hadn't earned. I learned that some things don't need to be earned. They just need to be done. I read before bed. Physical books because the phone was a door into the noise of the world, and I was trying to give myself quiet hours. And 2 or 3 times a week, I put on the skirt and the blouse and stood in front of the mirror, and I practiced being someone who is allowed to be still. It was a Sunday afternoon, 3 weeks after that first night, and my mother asked me to go shopping with her. Not for anything specific. Just the routine shopping she did every few weeks, fabric, thread, a few household things. She sewed sometimes, a habit she'd kept since before I was born, and she liked to take her time in the fabric store, running her hands along bolts of cloth the way some people browse in bookshops. I went. We were in the fabric store, and she was holding up two shades of linen side by side, and she asked, without looking at me, "Do you know what you're drawn to?" Fabric, I mean. Texture. I understood that she was asking something larger than that. I looked at the fabrics around us. I thought about the wrap skirt, the way it moved. I thought about what I had noticed in the evenings, how certain textures felt grounding and others felt noisy. I said, things that have weight, that hang properly, not stiff, not delicate. She nodded. She put one bolt back and kept the other. Then she moved to the next aisle and I followed. She said, "Your grandmother sewed everything she wore. Did I ever tell you that?" She said store clothes didn't fit right. She meant they didn't fit her specifically, her measurements, her proportions. She said there was no reason to spend your life in clothes made for someone else. I didn't say anything. She said, "I've been thinking about that lately." We walked the rest of the aisle in silence. At the end, she paused in front of a display of thread and said, not looking up, "I could teach you to sew. If you wanted. Not as a project. Just if you wanted something that fit." I thought about the offer for a long moment. The part of me that was still braced, still waiting for the conversation to turn into something harder, relaxed slightly. I said, "I'd like that." She picked out her thread. We went to the counter. She paid, and I carried the bags, and we walked out into the afternoon, and that was the whole conversation. It was enough. We started the following Saturday. She brought out her machine, an older model, solid and heavy, the kind that had been made to last, and she showed me the basics without talking too much, which was the right approach. She demonstrated, then let me try, then corrected gently when I went wrong. She did not make a thing of it. I made something very simple that first day. A straight piece of hemming, practice only, not a garment. But I sat at the machine, and I moved my hands in a deliberate way toward a specific outcome, and I thought, this is what taking care of yourself looks like. Not always a feeling. Sometimes a skill. I went home that evening. I had my own place again by then, a small apartment 20 minutes away, because my mother and I had agreed that proximity was one thing and living together was another, and some space between us helped us both. I went home and sat in my kitchen and felt the particular satisfaction of a day that had been good in a quiet way. My phone had 3 unread messages. 2 from work. 1 from a friend asking if I wanted to meet that week. A few months ago, all 3 would have felt like demands. That evening, they just felt like my life, waiting for my response when I was ready. I ate dinner. I cleaned the kitchen. I read for an hour. Before bed, I stood in front of the mirror in the new wrap skirt. I had bought a second one, a soft charcoal, from the same thrift store, and I looked at myself, and I thought about what my mother had said about my grandmother. There was no reason to spend your life in clothes made for someone else. I thought about how long I had spent inside a version of myself that was made for someone else. Not by anyone's malice. No one had forced me into it. It was something I had assembled over years, piece by piece, from what I thought was expected, what I thought would keep things smooth, what I thought confidence and adulthood required. I had been wearing it every day, and it had never fit. Standing in the mirror, I was not healed. I was not transformed. I was still figuring things out, still working long hours, still navigating the complicated geometry of family and expectation and the slow labor of becoming. But I was doing it in a way that felt, for the first time in a long time, like it was mine. Just mine. That matters more than I can adequately explain. Here is something no one tells you about rebuilding yourself. It is boring. Not in a bad way. In the way that anything real and sustainable is boring, repetitive, incremental, largely undramatic. The movies about personal transformation skip the middle part, where you do the same small things every day and nothing happens that you could put in a highlight reel, but slowly, imperceptibly, you become someone who is slightly more okay than you were 6 months ago. That was my life for most of that year. I went to work. I came home. I cooked actual meals 3 or 4 times a week because I had started to understand that food was one of the ways I either took care of myself or abandoned myself, and I was trying to choose the former more consistently. I slept 7 hours most nights. I got better at leaving work at work. Not perfectly, but better, which is the honest answer. On weekends I sometimes sewed. My mother was patient and specific in her teaching, and I learned slowly, which I was finding I had more tolerance for than I used to. Patience with myself was a new skill. I was not naturally patient. I had always rushed toward competence, hated the stage of being a beginner. That year I learned to sit with being a beginner at things. My wardrobe at home grew gradually. I want to say this without drama because that is how it happened. Without drama, without crisis, without any singular decision. A few more pieces from thrift stores. An occasional item bought new, carefully considered, tried on in the dressing room of a store where no one knew me, placed in a bag, and carried home with a quietness that was not shame so much as discretion. A privacy I extended to myself the way I might extend it to anything I was still learning. I wore these things at home. In the mornings, on days when I was working from the apartment, I would make coffee and sit at the kitchen table in a soft blouse and the charcoal skirt, and I would look out the window at the street below and feel, not happy exactly, not in that performing, effortful way, just settled. The way you feel when you are in the right room. When the temperature is right, and the light is right, and nothing is pulling at you. That sensation, that settledness, had been so rare in my adult life that I had almost forgotten it was possible. I want to be clear. I was not pretending to be someone else. This is important. I was not constructing a character, not performing something for an imaginary audience. I was, in the simplest terms, wearing clothes that felt like mine, in a space that felt like mine, and letting myself be present there without commentary. The commentary had been constant for years. The internal narration that evaluated everything. Should you be doing this? What does this mean? What would happen if? What are you? Why are you like this? The questions that don't wait to be answered because they're not really questions, they're a habit of self-interruption. That year, I got better at noticing when the commentary started and letting it pass without engaging with it. Not suppressing it, I had done enough suppressing. Just observing it the way you observe weather. There's that thought again. There it goes. Posture became a practice. I know I've mentioned this before, but it remained central for me in a way that surprised me. Every morning, before I left the apartment or began work, I stood in front of the mirror, and I just looked. I straightened. I breathed. I tried to inhabit my own outline without apology or exaggeration. Not rigid, not slumped, just present. It took maybe 90 seconds, but it changed the texture of the day. At work, I started to advocate for myself in small ways. When I disagreed with a decision, I said so, briefly and without aggression, and then I let the outcome be whatever it was. When someone asked me to take on something beyond my capacity, I said I'd have to move something else first, which was new, which was hard, which became easier the more I did it. A colleague asked me once what had changed. She said I seemed different, calmer, less like I was about to apologize for something. I thought of my mother's words. I said I'd just been taking better care of myself. She said, "Whatever you're doing, it's working." I thanked her and went back to my desk and didn't make a big thing of it. Inside, I noted it. I let it count. I had not been good at letting things count, compliments, progress, moments of genuinely doing okay. I had a habit of discounting them immediately, rushing past them to the next problem. That year I practiced slowing down enough to let the good things land. My brother called me one evening. We talked for almost 2 hours, which we hadn't done since we were teenagers. He told me about things he was struggling with at school. I listened. I did not solve. I did not perform competence or give 5-step plans. I listened and said things that were true, and he thanked me at the end and said it helped. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen in the soft light and thought about how many conversations like that I had been too depleted to have. I was not depleted anymore. Not fixed. Not finished. But not depleted. I'll tell you where I am now. I am not a different person. This is not that kind of story. I am the same person I have always been, which is the point. The person underneath all the performance, all the useful, all the years of moving like an apology. That person was always there. I was just spending so much energy being what the room needed that I had no energy left to be what I needed. Clothing was not the solution. Let me be clear about that too. The skirts and blouses and the evenings in front of the mirror were not a cure for exhaustion or perfectionism or the deeply established habit of minimizing myself. They were a door. A small, quiet door that I happened to find in a dark hallway, and when I went through it, I found not a new person, not a secret self, not some revelation. I found a practice. The practice of paying attention to myself. Gently. Consistently. Without expecting it to be dramatic. My mother and I still sew on Saturdays sometimes. I have made two simple things that actually fit: a pair of wide-leg trousers in dark green linen, and a blouse with a proper collar that I am genuinely proud of. Not because they are masterpieces. Because I made them to fit me specifically. My measurements. My proportions. My life. My grandmother, apparently, had the right idea. I have told two people, beyond my mother. A friend I have known since we were students, who received the information with the straightforward warmth that is entirely characteristic of her, said some version of that makes sense, actually, and then asked if I wanted to go to dinner, and we went to dinner, and it was a normal evening, and I am grateful for the normalcy of it more than I can say. And a therapist I started seeing 8 months ago, not because of any of this specifically, but because I finally accepted that having someone to talk to is not a luxury or a weakness, but a form of maintenance, the way changing the oil is maintenance and not an admission of failure. She does not think I am confused or in crisis. She thinks I am a person who spent a long time not having access to myself, and is now doing the work of getting that access back. She uses different words for it, but that is roughly what she means. I am not going to tell you what category I fit into. Not because I'm hiding something, but because I am genuinely still in the process of understanding, and I have made peace with that process taking as long as it takes. I used to need answers immediately. The not knowing felt like a flaw, an incompleteness. Now I understand that the not knowing is just where I am, and where I am is okay. What I know is this. I know that I stood in my bedroom one night in a wrap skirt and a cream blouse and felt, for the first time in years, like I could breathe. That was real. That mattered. I know that my mother sat on the edge of my bed and did not make it a catastrophe, and that gift, the gift of not being made into a catastrophe, is something I am still learning how to receive. I know that the small decisions repeated, standing up straight, eating a real meal, sleeping 7 hours, making something with my hands, leaving work at the end of the day, these are not dramatic acts. They are not the plot of any good movie, but they are the plot of a life that is actually livable, and livable is what I was after. I know that confidence is not the absence of self-doubt. It is the decision to move forward anyway, and to do it with your spine straight and your shoulders back and your eyes open, and to let yourself take up the space you are supposed to take up. I know that dignity is not something you earn by performing correctly. It is something you practice. Every morning, in front of the mirror, for about 90 seconds, before the day begins. I know that being known, even partially, even imperfectly, is better than being useful. And I know that the door I found in that dark hallway has not led me to any final destination. It has led me to a version of my life that feels like mine. Not finished. Not perfect. Not without the ordinary difficulty and frustration and uncertainty that belong to any life lived honestly. Just mine. That is what I wanted to tell you. That is the whole story.